Hi everyone, and welcome again to my audiovisual channel. I am Gabriela Handal. I'm a draftsman and the host of this show, A Conversation About Art. During each episode, I look for the meaning of art and beauty through conversations with colleagues in different artistic fields. Today, I bring you episode 53, and I will have this conversation with artist advisor Marina Granger. If you'd like to support this channel, liking, leaving a comment, and sharing this video is incredibly helpful, and so is subscribing. These three are immediate and have no additional cost to you. If you'd like to support my channel with money, you can do so by purchasing my drawings directly from my website, from the Contemporary Figurative Art Online Gallery, where I have a selection of drawings, buying things I make on eBay, buying prints of my drawings, or leaving a tip. These are all quite helpful in keeping this podcast and my artistic group going. The links for all of them are in the show notes. Thank you very much for watching and or listening, and enjoy the episode. Okay, so Marina Granger, welcome to my podcast, A Conversation About Art. You are episode 53. Please tell our listeners and viewers who you are and what you do.
Hi, thank you so much for having me on this show. My name is Marina Granger, as you said. Thank you so much. I am the founder of a company called the Artist Advisory. So I worked in New York City galleries for over 15 years when I realized that there was this huge shift in the art world. And I started working in galleries before Facebook, before the internet was really like a big deal. And I realized because the internet was such a major democratizer of the art world, all of a sudden you could get in front of anyone and everyone. I started a company that helps artists, visual artists, navigate the art world, and by precisely giving them these tools of how they can use the internet.
Yes, okay.
In front of whoever they want to get in front of.
Yes, okay. So the shift that you're talking about is the presence of the internet.
Yeah, I started this company shortly after the 2016 election in the US, and that was greatly influenced by Facebook, I think, right? The internet, because of that. And even before this huge aha moment that I had, I realized that I didn't like seeing so many talented artists get the runaround. It was so unfortunate. And I would, for many years, I would like sit at the front of the gallery, and there were so many artists that would come in and they'd say like, hey, how do I show my work here? And I'm sitting there in this like 3,000 square foot space that's very intimidating, I imagine. And I'm thinking, how do I talk to them? How do I tell them that, maybe this gallery is not the right one for you, or another better, without making the owners of the gallery upset.
Yeah.
So this was like a huge thing for me. Yeah, but the shift was really in the art world. All of a sudden, before the internet was so accessible to everyone, even in before 2010, it was really difficult to get in front of the right people. It was difficult for an artist relatively difficult for an artist to get in front of a gallerist, to show their work somewhere, to make a connection with a curator or another artist. But because the internet is it's like so huge, it's so cool. Now all of a sudden artists can connect to anyone and everyone. And that is the huge shift right there.
Yeah. Okay, that makes a lot of sense. And it reminds me a little bit of something that has been mentioned in previous episodes regarding the dissemination of information, and also the differences between everyone's visual language. And it's exactly that. It's like the access that we have to information now, because we basically have access to all information. And anyone with a smartphone, a laptop, a tablet, a desktop computer. So, I mean, I don't know, so very many more people than before can now have access to any information that they even just think of. Any curiosity, you can tippy tap it on on the browser and you find an answer.
It keeps us awake at night sometimes. I don't know about you, but sometimes I wake up at 3 a.m. and I'm like, how do dolphins sleep? Like, how do they sleep? It's one of those things. The beautiful thing about that is, yes, we have everything at the tips of our fingers, at our fingertips. But what's cool is finding someone who can also digest that information and present it to you in a way that is palatable and understandable. And I think that's why we still have really good education, you know, important. And that happens, you know, on the grand scheme in universities, but it also happens in the very famous YouTube University, which I guess you are a big part of.
Trying to be. Okay. All right. So I do have questions regarding this being an artist advisor. Well, okay. So I have very many questions and I can hope I can fit them all in before asking what are the main questions of the podcast, which of course are also related. Okay. So how did you start your relationship with art, and why did you take the route of being an advisor to artists instead of making work yourself?
Yeah. So first of all, I'm going to answer the very last part of that question first. I have no talent for visual. It is just maybe, you know, I look creative and I am creative. I was actually a ballet dancer for a little while, and that's my creative output, but I'm not a visual artist. I wish I had the talent because it looks so fun to do. Now, I first got into art because I was so fascinated by one thing. I was so fascinated when I went to the Metropolitan Museum of Art. I was 7 years old. We just moved to this country from the former Soviet Union, from Kiev, Ukraine. And I walked in and I thought, oh my gosh, like, who decides what's on the wall? And also, where are the people that work here? Are they behind the wall? Like, I literally, this was my biggest number one curiosity, and it drove me to pursue a bachelor's and master's degree in art history. And I ended up working in galleries trying to figure out this question. Now, the real reason I'm an artist advisor is because it really pained me to see so many talented artists get the runaround. And I witnessed something when I was like 18 years old. I was just, you know, walking around New York City. I was doing some sort of report for class on galleries in a certain neighborhood. And it changed the way that I viewed the art world. And it became it was like a core memory. It was so important. So I walk into a gallery called OK Harris Works of Art, which has been, up until the death of the owner, the gallery was there since in the Soho neighborhood of New York City since probably 1970, 1973. And I walk in and it's kind of intimidating, right? Like when you walk into a gallery, it gets intimidating because you have these big white walls and these desks where you can only see the top of people's heads.
Yeah.
Maybe you see the top of their heads. And this artist walks up to one of those desks where you see, you know, the top of the head, and says, hey, you know, I really want to show my work here. And this is like, I was interning at galleries at the time. So I was like, oh, you can't do that. That's no good. Like, send you, you know, all the way turn around and go back. So he walks up and he's like, hey, you know, I want to show my work here. And the guy from behind the desk gets up, takes a moment, looks at his portfolio. And back then it was, I think he had actual like slides, or I can't imagine. Oh, he had slides and actual images. So if you wanted to put the slides in like the best projector, then you could. So he was looking at the images and he goes, look, I think your work's wonderful, but you haven't found your voice yet. There's no consistency in your work. So when you find your voice, when you find your consistency, come back. And I thought, this is like 2 minutes, not even 2 minutes of this guy's time. And he gave this artist such great direction that is going to change the way that this artist goes forward and will actually achieve something really good. And that person who was behind the desk was Ivan Karp. He's the owner of OK Harris Works of Art. And I can't imagine how many times, I don't know how many times I've told the story, but it was so moving to me. And I thought, this is so cool. So when I actually sat at the desk, right, when I was one of those people, I thought to myself, if somebody walks in, I'm going to give them that sort of, as much direction as I could. So if they walked in and the work just wasn't fitting into the gallery, I would tell them why. But I would tell them, it was good. And I think that was just like such a pivotal moment for me, just seeing that. So that really propelled me when I had the kind of the balls to start. I was just in my early 30s then, and I guess now I'm in my late 30s, but in my early 30s, I was like, well, if I'm going to make a mistake, I better make it now. And so it's okay for me to start this company. And I went on, and now I've had the artist advisory since 2018. We have a podcast that is kind of like a guerrilla podcast. I post whenever I'm very inspired to. I have an online group program that I've now sold out 11 times.
Nice.
That has given such amazing results to the artists who work with me. And a lot of this is all this information that I learned from the art world and just being in galleries and seeing artists get the runaround, how to get them not to get the runaround, and how to get them in front of the right people, and also like who are the right people for you. So did I answer your question and then some? Sorry.
Yeah, no, that's perfect. Okay, so I'm sorry, go ahead, sorry.
I said I like to over-explain. It's kind of a weird thing.
No, that's okay, that's perfect. It's no bother, I welcome it, the conversation stuff. Okay, so then in that case, I guess that I have another question here then. What does the art advising encompass? So like, I guess like what subjects do you cover as an art advisor? Because it's like, so do you talk with the artist about the work or the subject matter? The subject matter, oh, you should work on this or what, on this subject or that subject, or I don't know, like technical stuff like stretch your canvas this way, or do you talk to them about scheduling, or do you like coach them on how to post and when to post on Instagram, or do you talk to them about exercise and diet? Like what is the scope of your art advising?
Yeah, so it's so important for me to tell you that it's not art advising. Art advising is actually when you are advising a collector and what to purchase. Yes. So I'm an artist advisor. And so what that encompasses is helping artists with their career and exclusively with their career. And there are certain tools that I use. And generally speaking, when I first start out working with an artist, whether it's in a group program of mine or one-on-one, what I do is I really hone in on any limiting beliefs that they have on themselves, because a lot of the time, and not every artist is like this, but a lot of artists were raised to think, oh, well, you want to be an artist? That's going to be a good hobby. You should be a doctor. Mm-hmm. We're ingrained in our mindset that it's going to be difficult to be an artist. As a matter of fact, as an immigrant to the US, when I came here, my family was like, not when I came here, but when I was like 13 or so, and I was like, I want to be a curator. And they were like, are you sure that's going to be a good hobby? But maybe you should be a doctor instead. And so I really know how unbelievable it feels that it's okay to be successful as an artist, right? To some people because of this programming that they've received over the years. And so one of the biggest things that we do is we break down this limiting belief. And it's so integral to your going forward in your career. When I spoke to Forbes, and I think I did a huge interview with them in June 2020, in the middle of the pandemic.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, you could still build community with Instagram if you're an artist. And I told them that I have this method for working with artists. We first hone in on on your intention as an artist. We work on your mindset. We work on your presentation. And then we formulate a roadmap on how to take action. Mm-hmm. And get to where you want to be. But I want to unpack this a little bit more. I told you a little bit about mindset. When it comes to intention, it's so important that you know why you're doing what you're doing. A lot of the time, it's difficult to articulate because as artists, you're visual people, right? So mm-hmm. You are like, hey, this looks cool and I'm called to do it, so I'm going to do it. But when you really articulate your intention, why you do what you do, why your perspective is so integral to the work that you're creating, and then tell us, what you do, that is huge and it's enormous. So when I work with artists, this is another big thing that we figure out, because from that comes your story. And I've developed this thing called the elevator pitch from working at art fairs for years, like standing in booths, and people would walk in and they'd see something, and how do you sell it in 2 seconds, right? Mm-hmm. How do you give them that push? Sometimes you don't have to, and the work is beautiful and they buy it and it's great. But a lot of the time they want to know a little bit more about the artist. So one thing that I've developed is this thing called the elevator pitch, which is telling people why you do what you do first, what you do, and then, why you do what you do, what your perspective is and how it informs the work, and then what you do, right? And then you can go into the process. Now, that's not going to work for every single artist right away, right? But I think that this is one of the best ways to create a story. And from there, we take that story and we put it into your presentation online and in person, right? So it goes into your website. And something that my group program does is it teaches artists how. I have a website template that you plug in. We have a tech tutor who helps you. We have a module on social media that really focuses on Instagram and how you can use Instagram to really get your point across about what you do. Because once you get this intention down and you put it into your presentation, what's going to happen is they're going to love your work because it's beautiful. It's fun to look at. Mm. But then when they tell people, their friends, or when they repost your work, or maybe somebody at a gallery sees your work and likes it, and when they want to tell somebody else about it, what are they going to say? Well, they do these really cool portraits. That's not going to sell the work for the other person. What's going to sell the work is telling a story about why you do what you do in a nutshell. And that way people are going to remember you and your work. And that's how you're going to create opportunities for yourself, right? Mm-hmm. So the final step of what I do with artists is we take action together. I never act as their agent because I want to teach you how to fish. So I don't have to for you. And it's been amazing that I've been teaching artists how to get press, how to get in front of the right galleries that don't accept submissions. This is a huge thing, right? And I can give us some tips on that. But I've also started working with some galleries who are now asking me for advice on how to present their artist work. And I've also started helping visual artists develop online courses because I've done an online course successfully, and I'm like pinching myself. I'm like so happy that it's helping so many people. But I've done it successfully now 11 times. So
Nice.
I'm like, yeah, that's another thing that I do. So yeah.
Okay. Yeah, that was really interesting and exactly what I asked. Like what you cover. What and what does the artist advisory encompass? And I think like the discernment of art advisory versus artist advisory is also a good one because actually when I was typing your email just now to send you the Zoom invite, I wrote the art advisory and I was like, wait, that doesn't sound right. You know, because you know, anyway, whatever, that's a little whatever. Okay, so all right, I am curious about why you think why do you think that you can help an artist? It's like, I mean, I don't want to, I mean, I really want to ask you the question because I'm curious, but I don't want to sound like a jackass asking you, like, it's like, oh, who do you think you are? I mean, I'm just curious about like what what gives you the confidence? Why do you think that you know enough about the art world? Why do you think that you know enough about helping an artist developing, you know, with ideas like developing their work or their mindset or any, like, why do you think that you're good at this? Why do you think you can do it?
Question. I feel like you're preparing me for the morning shows. I'm ready. So, first of all, I've worked in galleries for so long in New York City, and I've shepherded, or not even myself, but I've helped some myself, some with the gallery. I've helped shepherd artists and their careers. I've figured out how to talk to the press about the artists so that their message gets across properly, right? And then in the past few years that I've had this company, I have seen so many artists get to where they want. I've had an artist who found her voice, which is, you know, I don't tell artists what to paint. I just make sure that their intention lines up. Who found her voice, is now showing with the New York City Gallery, who's taking her to an art fair in New York City. I've helped an artist who, you know, and everyone's a little bit different. Everyone needs a little bit more. Everyone needs the same ingredients, but a little bit more of one thing and a little bit less of another thing. So I've helped another artist who is, I'm like, I can't really say who it is, but she has had a waiting list now for her work, shows with several galleries all over the world. And this is someone who, when they came to me and was like, I only have like a bachelor's, so I don't think I'm going to make it in the art world. And I was like, stop with the limiting beliefs, right? You never know what can happen. Because so I guess my experience is what really guides me into helping artists. But, you know, it's a two-way street. It's so important for artists to know that, you know, I can help them so much, but they also need to take action, right? So, and I recently interviewed some of the artists that I've worked with on my podcast, and they kind of tell you a little bit more about this like magic formula that I use. I also wanted to mention, I sometimes use, so I'm certified in classical Chinese feng shui. Okay. And I don't know if you're familiar with it, but it's basically about the manipulation of energy or the movement of energy in the house or around the house as well. And I have helped artists with that, using that tool.
Interesting.
For those who are open to it, because it's a huge thing. And yeah, I guess that. And also, I think, and we talked about this a little bit before we started the podcast, but I think that what really qualifies me to help artists are the many different road paths or pathways that I see, because I'm a naturally positive person. And I think that, your goal is like the center of a cobweb. There's so many different ways to get to it.
Yes, I like that a lot. Yes, I have been recently experimenting with dietary stuff, and it's really very interesting how it changes things. And more recently, I have felt really motivated and very the negative emotion has been kept at bay. And it's like crazy how, like what you just said about the cobweb and the thing that you want, and there's very many paths, and but at the same time, even though the paths are there and they're open and available, it's like, because like I am a pretty anxious person and I get overwhelmed about stuff, because it's like, oh, I want to learn anatomy, but it's like, okay, where do I start? Well, it's like the body is very complicated and all of this stuff, and it's so it's like more recently the pathing, or like the choices, or both, have become a little more clear, and it's like it's just like, all right, no, and in my mind I'll be like, all right, I'm just gonna, all right, no, do this first. No, you have to do this first and then that, and like not just like the choices, but then like the prioritization of stuff. So then that just just what you were talking about just now reminded me of that very thing. Is it's like sometimes indeed coaching is extremely helpful to kind of clear out the anxiety, or to help the person, or to like remind the person that you have all these choices, you can choose whichever one you want, and this one might work better because of this, or something like that. It's very, very interesting.
Yeah, it's like even Beyonce has a coach, right? Because I'm sure she gets a lot of ideas, but it's so true. And I think that a lot of the time, things like this are exasperated by social media too, right? Like,
Yeah.
it's not all that great all the time.
Yeah.
Because there's a wonderful book called, what is it called? It's like I have to look it up on my Audible, but it's about Dopamine Nation. Is it Dopamine Nation? Where we're living in a nation where, or in a society where we get instant gratification from everything. Like even when we want to watch something on demand on Netflix, we get instant gratification. We get instant gratification from watching the likes on our posts and things like that. And so that really gives a lot of exercise to our monkey brain, and we're like, what do we do? So it's always good to find, no matter what you do. I mean, I also have coaches that I hire. It's so important for you to get perspective outside of yourself. You don't have to hire a coach for this. You could create an accountability group within your community of artists, right? And think to yourself, okay, like we're going to meet once a month on Zoom. We don't even have to meet in person, and we're going to go over our goals, and everyone can share how you can get to those goals.
Yes, yeah. That's really good. Okay. All right. So, Mrs. Granger, what is art in your opinion?
Oh gosh, that is like the hardest question. And I knew it was coming. I knew it was coming because you asked this question on your show. What is art? I think that ultimately it's an expression of emotion, I want to say. But yeah, I think it's a human expression of emotion, and whether that emotion is about something that is process-based, how satisfying it is to make the work.
Something that is what? Sorry.
Process-based.
Yeah.
How it is satisfying to make the work, or something that is deeply philosophical and profound, right? Not that process-based work isn't deeply philosophical and profound, but whatever that emotion is, however you put it out there, that's art. And it doesn't, it could be visual art, it could be dancing, right? It could be opera,
Mm-hmm.
so many things, music other than opera.
Okay. Um, so, I mean, okay, what would you say is an expression? Like, what counts as expressing oneself? Because, I mean, I guess I wonder if you personally discern between things that call themselves art, which obviously have no emotion or expression in them. They're just, although I was going to say that they're just in there for the like shock value, which I think is really irritatingly popular for a while now. But then I guess you could also argue that wanting to shock people
Yeah.
is wanting to express. But what do you think about that?
I think exactly that, wanting to shock people is very much, an emotion, right? There's a reaction that you expect from someone, an emotional reaction, and there's a reason that you are craving it, right? An emotional reason. And so, one thing that I got to say is I learned that art is subjective, right?
Art is objective,
Subjective.
subjective.
Yeah. So, not what is art necessarily, but how someone might admire it or might like it, might not like it. And I've learned this working in galleries. Like, I wish I could say I've sold artwork by artists that I love all of their work. Then some of their work, I'm thinking, I wouldn't buy this. And that's okay because it is subjective, but I could see the beauty in it because it was something that was very special for them to make.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And it's impossible for somebody to like all of the art.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that we should be in a space where we allow people to explore whatever it is that they're making. So when we're in a space where we're criticizing, is that art or is that not art? We're actually stopping them from getting deeper into it and finding their voice.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, a really good analogy. And, I seem like I'm like, oh, okay. But anything's fine. Anything's fine with me. But here's an analogy that I feel, I don't know, but I have a feeling like you would totally get this. So when I was growing up, I like vehemently would not listen to any music that was on MTV. I was like, that's not cool. Those people are sellouts. Screw those people, right? Like my first concert I went to was Typo Negative. I love them. Maybe they were on MTV, but they weren't like, Blink 182. Ugh.
Yeah.
So here's the thing. I worked, I know it's like, can you tell? But you can't tell. Like, who is she? Work at a little goth store on 8th Street while I was in college as well, like, making money because gallery internships didn't pay.
Of course not.
And as a matter of fact, by the way, there was one point in my life where I was working 7 days a week. I had a first floor museum job. And then I was interning at the time for 2 days of the week. So 7 days I would go to this museum. It was crazy. Anyway, so I worked at a little goth store called Fun House, which is now closed, but it was amazing.
That's a good name.
So cool. And I was talking to one of my colleagues who was like so much more like, into subculture than I was. Like, I lived in that subculture for so much longer and like way more cool, I thought.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, oh, I just hate Blink 182. And this colleague told me, he's like, look, I hate them too. But what's wonderful is that they are the gateway for many kids who don't have the access to the real punk shows that we go to. They can't go see Dina Cancer at CBGB because they don't know she exists. But once they start to dig deeper after listening to Blink 182, they're going to get into it, and that will be their gateway. So I respect what they do.
Tolerate them.
Exactly. I will tolerate them, just like I will tolerate some things that are, art.
Yeah, okay, that's fair. That's fair. Although so then tell me what you think about this. I don't, those individuals who make the quote unquote art, or even, the shocking art, that's really obviously joke art. Those people being a gateway to real.
Yeah, I'm almost thinking like maybe shocking isn't the word, shiny. Do you mean shiny?
Yeah, a little bit of both. Well, I mean, I'm using the term shocking because I feel like the shock value is used like in a facile sort of way, in the sense that you're using that to call attention, and then there's really no deeper thought in the work. And the value is really the shock of it, and then that's it. There's no beauty, there's no contemplation. It's just like, and then that's it. And then so like that's like it just seems very shallow and like void of thought. That's my opinion on that. And I feel like it's also trite at this point, in the sense that it's easier to go to the shock value than to put the thought into something. It's like, and actually that also makes me think of what we were talking about earlier about the relationship, like how social media influences us and makes us more anxious versus, because it's like, oh no, the immediate gratification, because it's like, you cannot get immediate gratification with something. That's physically impossible. You have to take one by one step to get to something. You have to invest time, you have to invest work, physical labor, you have to invest days and years, and some things sometimes you're not going to get it tomorrow. So then I feel like using shock value to make work is wanting that immediate reaction and wanting to get the work quickly. It's like you want to, it's a shortcut. It's like a cheap shortcut, in my opinion. Yeah.
Let's not discount the fact that sometimes, the shock value, while it's obvious, right? Because it's obvious, it feels like it's very on the surface. It's like saying like, is this, what is her name? Her Instagram is the Rubenstein. Do you know this artist?
No, I don't.
Oh my gosh. Because this is a great example, because there is shock value, but it's like there are layers that go beyond the shock value as well. Before I talk about her work, which I think is amazing, I'm going to say this, yes, I know what you're saying. It's like they're asking for a visceral reaction that is so obvious from the viewer by creating this artwork with shock value. But here's the thing, what went into creating that artwork? And could that artist eventually develop more layers in their work? And, maybe right now, shock value because it's obvious, right? But shock value as in like something that will get this reaction from you, I don't think that's the thing that we have to bring up and say like, oh, this isn't art, because eventually I think it is art in the sense that it's getting an emotional reaction from someone, and chances are it took a lot to make the work, right? What I'm concerned about is, on the other side of that argument, or maybe it's not the other side. What about like shiny art? I went to art fairs and I'm thinking to myself, I go to the Miami fairs every single year. I've been going for the past 10 years. And I walked around one fair where there were literally just like shiny gratuitous sculptures that maybe it was beyond me. Maybe I just didn't understand what was going on with them and like what they were all about. But there was nothing there for me. And I thought, this looks like it's fabricated somewhere and it could easily be in a TJ Maxx, you know, and in like the clearance section. And why is it for sale here for $10,000? And that to me is a huge question. Like, is that art? Right? Here's the thing. I am not an art critic. Okay. Very important to know. I'm not Jerry Saltz. So I'm not super qualified to say this, but personally, what I want to say is I think that there's somebody out there who's going to see the shiny sculpture or the shock value art, and they're going to fall in love with it, and it's going to be aesthetically pleasing to their eye. And for them, this is art. And so who am I to say that it's not art? Right?
Sure. No, I mean, that's fair. I just, that is of course perfectly fair. I just feel like, and I mean, that's really just my opinion. It's just, I'm not trying to have a debate specifically or
No.
at all, really, not at all. I'm not trying to like argue with you or,
I totally get it.
change your mind or anything. Really just like discuss like back and forth or, you know, what do you think about this or that? Because I do think the discursion of and hierarchy even or value giving is what determines what is art or what is, you know, valuable. Because, you know, if I know you haven't said that anything can be art, but if anything can be art, then that means there is no art. It doesn't exist because everything is art. It's like there has to be a cutting off point. So I guess, and actually that's one of the reasons for which I started the podcast, because I want to like demarcate a little bit more clearly what I think art is. Because like, for example, you know, for me, perhaps it's a bit more within like what is quote unquote traditional art, you know, like drawings, paintings, and sculptures and this stuff. But that's not all. That one starts to cut that. I mean, that I start to make a division, because it isn't just that. Because obviously I don't just make one line across the paper and it's like, I'm gonna sell this for 10 grand at the MoMA or something, you know, because that's the kind of shit that gets in there. But because it's obviously not that simple. It's like there's something more in there, and it's like, you know, I am aware that I do it all the time, or at least I like to think that I do it all the time, you know, art. But then I still don't know what it is, because there is obviously something else in there.
You know, this brings me to another thought. I wonder if we can say that as long as someone, when it comes to fine art, right? Because that's another demarcation to make, fine art. Because I think, you know, costume design is art, but it's not fine art. Dancing.
But it's not what? Sorry?
Fine.
Yeah. Yes.
So when it comes to fine art, because also I did costume design. I didn't tell you this. I did costume design between starting my company and leaving my last gallery job for TV and film. And realized like I did so many commercials in that year or so. And I realized a lot about advertising and branding during that time that I bring to my business.
Yeah, I'll
but
bet.
Back to the question. So fine art. I think that as long as someone says it's fine art, I know this is crazy, then it is fine art. And this is something that should be empowering for artists to hear, because when I was studying art history, and, you know, I actually really, for the longest time, I thought I was going to be a Northern Renaissance scholar. Like, I thought that was going to be my thing, you
What
know.
is that?
Like Jan van Eyck, Roger van der Weyden, Hieronymus Bosch,
Uh-huh, uh-huh, uh-huh.
the Northern Europe.
Oh, scholar on those specific artists. Yes, I see. Okay.
Well, specifically Hieronymus Bosch. So I was pretty sure that was what going to be my path. And
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
out that way. And I'm very glad that it turned out the way it did. But I started, I couldn't find, when I first wanted to go into the art world, I couldn't find museum jobs. It was like impossible for me to get hired in a museum. So I settled, listen to this, I settled for those of you who have parents who are like, you got to be a doctor. I settled for a gallery job. Okay. And I ended up doing so well. There's over 1,000 galleries in New York City that have staff. Like, you can get a job, So I went and also in the museums, usually museums employ over, a good amount of people, especially like the Met and the MoMA, they employ over 1,000 people.
Mm.
That's good to know. But the museum where I worked employed like 50 people. But anyway, that's a whole different story. But what was my point? I guess what I was saying is that when it comes to defining fine art, as long as you say that it's art, it's okay. And it's almost like saying, how, I'm Jewish, and a big part of being Jewish, if you wanted to get Israeli citizenship, I think they say, oh, as long as you say you're Jewish, you're Jewish. And
Really?
I think that's it. I don't know. I'm very not religious when it comes. I'm very much a cultural Jew. I just carry the guilt, and guilt from the maternal line.
Yes, of course.
Yeah. And so I feel like that's really that. It's so important for us to be open to people who are like, yeah, to me, that's fine art. And I guess what I was saying, now I remember. Thanks for your patience with me.
Of course.
So when I was studying art history, I really thought, when I started to work with contemporary artists, because I was working with dead artists, right?
Mm-hmm.
I was like, well, dead artists can't say I'm wrong. And when
That's pretty gothy.
yeah. So then when I started working with living artists, I was like so nervous because I realized I was conditioned to, in all my education in university and in grad school, that whatever artists say is the truth. Like, we have, I don't know if you know, I had a book called Art in Theory that had all these manifestos and writings, like firsthand accounts from artists writing about their work. And some of it does not make sense at first glance, right? And so when we were studying contemporary art, we used this book as sort of like the starting point, as a primary source for us to understand what work is about. And working in galleries, we would certainly start from the artist statement that the artist would provide when it came to creating a press release, telling the story of the artist, and really listening to the artist. So I've been conditioned to believe that the artist is always right. And it's something that should be very empowering to guys, because all of these curators out there, all of these gallerists out there, believe me, they've also been conditioned to believe the artist is always right. So when you're talking to them and you're thinking to yourself, gosh, I hope I don't say anything wrong, there's literally nothing wrong that you can say.
Yes, I see.
So when you say that you're a fine artist, I think that's important for us to acknowledge. And if you think it's fine art and you made it, then it's fine art. And a lot of the time, you know, when you're saying like I scribble a line, or like, for example, there's an erased drawing at I think it's at the MoMA, but it's fully erased. And it's actually got this really important story behind it, where it was a drawing that Rauschenberg made. I think I'm going to get this right. It's a drawing that one artist made for another, and the other artist said, "Fuck you" to him, and erased it. And so you know, it's kind of an interesting anecdote in art history, but it shows the importance of the story. And because ultimately, when we're making art for people who maybe are, you know, or when you are making art, you're making art for people, for an audience that doesn't necessarily have, you know, that deep of a scholarly education on what art is. So I think it's okay for you to make things for an audience that, as long as it's in line with your intention and they get it and they like it. So I guess I'm very like easy to please. Like, that's fine art because you say it is.
Yeah. Okay. No, that's fair. All right. So then, Mrs. Granger, what is beauty in your opinion?
Symmetry. I don't know. Maybe not. No. That's what I've been programmed to believe, that symmetry is beauty. Beauty is what's pleasing to the eye, and it's going to be different for everyone. It's another thing that's subjective. You know, what I find to be beautiful, another person might find to be really not. You know, and there's I know we're talking about art, but I'm thinking about clothing, for example. You know, and the different tastes that we all have. I think as long as you find it to be pleasing to the eye, then there it is. That's beauty.
Okay. That actually reminds me a bit of what I mentioned earlier about the dissemination of information now versus in the past. Because, I mean, I definitely agree that every person, every group of people, and within a group of people, every individual also has their own different tastes. But I also have a feeling like there are things that have persisted for a reason. And I have listened to a little bit of evolutionary psychologist. Is that the term? I think? Yes, evolutionary psychologist people talking. And there's this very interesting argument about beauty being things, because I mean, these people argue that beauty is cross-cultural. And I really like that idea, because we are not that different from each other. We all have the same ancestors and all of this stuff. And so it's like, I really like the argument that the things that we continue to find attractive, or at least appealing, like you said, the symmetry, is because those characteristics in other humans, or, you know, in animals, whatever, are things that have helped, that have aided in our survival. So it makes a lot of sense that they have stuck around and that they have persisted because they kept working. So
I also, by the way, I just realized I love how I'm like, yeah, symmetry is beautiful. Meanwhile, if you look at my background, there's nothing symmetrical about it.
Same.
Right. And yeah, it's kind of crazy because, yeah, you're right. There's certain characteristics and traits, like we might all look at a certain flower and say, hey, that's beautiful, right? Because we know it's natural, and or a tree, because evolutionarily these trees give us oxygen and we have to like them. We have to find them aesthetically pleasing so we don't cut them down, hopefully. I see your point there, and I totally get that. I think that's really interesting to observe, right?
Yeah, I think perhaps the reason for which, or these are all just my little hypotheses, you know. One of the reasons perhaps because one of the reasons for which we think our tastes are very like irreconcilably different or something that divides us or whatever is because of, and that's the connection I wanted to make with the dissemination of information, is that we because we have access to so much stuff that we can see with our eyeballs, I think that not interferes like in a bad way, but because I feel like the baseline, say for example, like as an example, say that symmetry is the best baseline, for example, but then it gets like seasoned, I guess, differently per person. And the seasoning is based on not just what we see, obviously, but who we surround ourselves with and our experiences, the, I don't know, whatever, all the cultures that we have experienced or just looked at, or, you know, social media, television, music, like all those things, you know, dress also.
Yeah. Yeah, I totally get that. I think that I think you're onto something there for sure. And you know, even I'm like, how do I formulate this thought? I'm also, by the way, I've been coughing for like 2 months, it feels like.
Oh no.
November, like I have some sort of something, and I'm on a cough suppressant that I think is making me loopy, so I apologize. But maybe I'm naturally loopy. Who knows?
No, I think you're doing great. Don't worry about it.
But I think my thought is that, you know, we have come up with certain things in aesthetics, right? And I'm not an expert in aesthetics at all, right? I mean, I've read Umberto Eco, but I can't say that I know very much about it. But I want to say, which is funny because I'm working in the art world. I just think it's very subjective, so I leave it open to interpretation. But I think that we have come up with certain systems and things that are effective for our survival, and they end up being beautiful, right? But I think that it's dangerous sometimes to put a label on it, because I think that ultimately beauty is subjective and everywhere, right? Because once we start putting a label on it, you know, you don't want to get into a sticky situation by saying, hey, this is beautiful, but that's not, so it's not worthy. Mm-hmm. No, I'm like, I should be a politician now. I'm like, no.
Well, you know, it's been brought up in an episode or two before, and I've also kind of, I think, like the Greeks or something, they thought of beauty as an ideal or like a goal or something to aspire to rather than a label necessarily. So it's something kind of that you work towards. So I mean, I like that idea a lot because I guess I'm just biased in favor of work and like physical labor somehow, because I don't know, you know, drawing is not the same as lifting 50 pounds, but it's still physical work. Anyway, the thing is that I like the idea of working towards something and kind of like accumulating towards something, and then it's kind of like the ideal in this case that we're talking about, or like the goal, which let's say that in this case it's beauty. It doesn't even strictly have to be achieved necessarily, but the fact that one is like thinking about it and working towards it is like, you know, that path to it, then it's, I mean, it's very fulfilling, because it's like, you know, you can, beauty can be your goal, or, you know, your, in your case, when you work with artists, you're like, all right, think about the goals, think about what goals, like try to pinpoint, like focus on something and then just work towards that. And then, I mean, it's not obviously not that simple, but it's like for the sake of the example.
Well, yeah,
Well, yeah,
and
what do you think about that?
first of all, it is totally that simple. It's so important for you to find your goal and just work backwards from it. Like, how can you get there? But I really love this idea of like beauty being something that is something that we strive for.
Mm.
And back, in the ancient Greek times, that made sense, right? But now when we're constantly bombarded by, like what you said, like the information era, right? We've got stuff everywhere. We're constantly bombarded by things that we are taught are beautiful, right? We're told are beautiful, like the type of body somebody has or the way they look. And I when it comes to art as well, like I'm sure there are people who go to MoMA, right? And they don't understand the Barnett Newman, but they know that it's beautiful because they've been told it's beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
And we're living in a society that doesn't make sense for us to see beauty that way, because society today has told us that it's totally achievable and all these people have it, but you don't. It's like that's what the message we get is. So while that's a beautiful philosophical thought from ancient Greek times, which I think is amazing, right, and is very inspiring, especially when it comes to where we are right now. We're recording this on January 3rd, 2023. It's the beginning of the new year. We want to set intentions. We want to go and create a space where we start to put down our goals and how to achieve them and how to achieve that beauty, right? I don't think we're living in an era right now where we can detach from the idea that beauty has been achieved by so many, and that we have to we have to change ourselves to be beautiful. So that I don't like. Mm-hmm. That's where we're at, and I think that just feeling beautiful is the most important thing, and knowing that beauty is subjective is super important. And when it comes to yourself and when it comes to your work, right? As long as you think that your work has achieved that aesthetic notch, like reach that goal, that notch, goalpost. I'm sorry, English is my second language. Did you know? Mm-hmm. I like that thing. It's my husband makes fun of me. He goes, Marina, you're the only one who's ready for the fire round, the lightning round for rapid fire questions. So yeah, that's what I want to say.
Mm-hmm. I was actually thinking that perhaps it's like even better now that, you can argue that one can argue that beauty is more subjective because of it being like peppered with other stuff. And it's like nobody is obligated to do anything that society tells them. And it's like, if you just like you tell your artists to like find their voice, it's like find your own beauty standards, or not beauty standards, find your own
definition of
find
beauty.
Find your own definition of beauty, or find depending on what you think beauty is, then work towards that goal, and then that's it.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay. All right, so we have broken the hour mark, Mrs. Granger. So I think this is a good and arguably uplifting place to start closing it out. So please tell our viewers and listeners what you're up to lately and where your work can be found. Do you have any projects you're working on, anything you're excited about?
Yes, thank you so much. It was like such a good conversation. I love talking about ideas. So this was wonderful. Thank you so much. I have a couple of things that I'm working on. I ended up, it was just by chance, it feels like, but by popular demand, I am now curating or the juror for 3 art magazines. Well, I'm not going to announce the third one yet because they didn't announce it, but I am curating an issue of Arts to Hearts magazine, which is a magazine that is based out of India but is global, and they have a wonderful podcast. So I'm curating the women's issue of that, and also curating the women's issue of Create magazine that's coming out soon. So that's one thing that I'm doing. I'm very excited about. You can learn more about the Artist Advisory at theartistadvisory.com. And when you get there, you can also download a free PDF guidebook for visual artists on how to get to the next place in your career. And it's very simple to read. I know we're all visual people, so it gets straight to the point. And I call it the answers. So giving you the answers there. So if you go to theartistadvisory.com, you can get that on there. You can also follow me on Instagram for all the latest stuff that I'm doing. It's the_artist_advisory. And you can also follow along on my YouTube channel, to which I post my occasional podcast episodes as well.
Nice.
And my YouTube channel, if you just type in the Artist Advisory, it should come right up. On top of that, I do have my podcast, which is available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and wherever else you listen to podcasts. It's called the Artist Advisory Hotline. Mm-hmm. So yeah, that's
all right. That's a lot of stuff. That's awesome and inspiring. Cool. Okay, good. All right. So, well, thank you, Marina, very much for joining me. Thank you for your time, your words, and your thoughts. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. Feel free to let Marina and I know what you think of this conversation in the comments. I encourage you to like this video and share it with any and all pertinent individuals, as it helps the channel, and in this way, more people can listen to these interviews. Finally, I invite you to subscribe to my audiovisual channel because I have more conversations scheduled. If you want to support Marina, myself, this podcast, or all three, the links will be in the show notes. So thank you everyone very much, and see you next time. Bye.